Greetings. This is Donnie Davis, and I'm the program coordinator. This is the beginning of the academic year 2023, and I wanted to talk about the plan for the Counseling Psych Seminar. So, I wanted to use a story to kind of illustrate what I think might be helpful for us as a group this year. The Counseling Psych Seminar is one of the primary places where it's just us, and we have a chance to talk about what it means to be a counseling psychologist. Your research courses you're in with a variety of other programs, theories, ethics. A lot of our curriculum is shared with other programs, and that is a source of strength, and you get exposed to different professional identities and learn to work well with others. So that's all important. But Counseling Psych Seminar is our space. This is a chance for us to come together once a month throughout the year and see if there are ways that we can help support each other in our training. So when I first came to do research with Dr. Worthington, I thought research was something that you just did by yourself, and you kind of went into a room and you just kind of clicked away in your keyboard. You ran stats by yourself, and it was pretty much a solo sport. And honestly, that was a little intimidating to me, and I wasn't sure that I would like it. When I first got to a doctoral program, he started saying, science happens in teams. And I was like, oh, dang, I know teams. I played high school soccer and football, and then I played football in college. So that was speaking my training language. So the story I wanted to kind of start out with was, in high school, there was a group of friends, and, our team would train in the mornings, like 6 a.m. every day, starting in 8th grade, actually. And we formed really strong bonds with each other. We supported each other, and we went through the whole experience of trying to get a spot on a team, get better, and potentially achieve well as a high school football team. So we went through a lot of things together, and I was used to training in that context, and we worked really, really hard together. And then in the transition to college, there was a summer where we weren't yet with our new team, but they just mailed us a book of what we were supposed to do for the summer, and it was just a workout book. And I'll be honest with you, that was one of the most frustrating and hard experiences of my life. I went from feeling pretty disciplined and knew that I had worked really hard and had done a good job to I still remember trying to go through this workout in my basement. I didn't have access to the weights and stuff and training equipment. So I was just trying to figure out a way to cobble through going through this training experience, but I didn't have a team, I didn't have a group, I didn't have an environment that was supportive to that training. So that's the analogy that I want you to think of when you think about Counseling Psych Seminar. We need to somehow transfer several of the things that you need to do to graduate with a doctorate. And more than that, you're training as a psychologist and trying to develop expertise that can kind of carry you through the rest of your career. And you have things that you feel are important to do with your life and work that you want to invest in. And so we need to somehow transition from, I have a list, it's almost like that book. I've got a book that I'm supposed to be doing by myself, hundreds and hundreds of hours of work to getting you integrated into a team and an environment where you have motivational support, relational support to do the work and the training that you have committed to do. So I'll say a few things about what it would mean to provide connective tissue to the program. What does it mean for us to come together as a team environment to start to build more cohesion as a group so that we have the kind of friendships and camaraderie that would support the kind of work that we're doing? One thing I'm trying to do is just organize the space. So I'm starting to use Teams. I like that a lot better than iCollege because it's just easier to use. You don't have to sign in and then have a phone call and document, like the double login thing. So we can try that out and see if that kind of eases the communication patterns within the program and within the seminar. A second thing that I'm working on is I'd like us to have a shared calendar. And so I have a channel within Teams for that. So it should be easy for you to find. You can just put this app on your phone, and anytime you click, the calendar channel, there's really kind of only one thing in there, the link to the calendar. And I've put on here information sessions that we're doing. So we're recruiting new people, and we have our admissions day on January 26th. I put all of our seminar dates in, and then other kind of programmatic things like our program meetings are going to occur. We're eating breakfast together before the departmental meetings at 9:30. And then we'll probably have some other Zoom calls. So we'll put all of the program meetings. So if you have things that you want us to be discussing at those meetings, you'll know throughout the year when that'll be occurring and when you need to send Sally, Hungu, or I information about that. So the norms in our program with program coordinator are to rotate around that role. So I am serving in the coordinating role for 3 years, and I'll bring kind of my perspective and any strengths that I have to that role. This probably doesn't need to be said, but I'll just go ahead and make sure it's clear. Our process of making a decision as a program, the main role of the coordinator is to be the point person for all the information coming in and out. There's correspondence with APA for accreditation. The department chair needs to have someone to coordinate with for various things like GRAs or admissions processes. So it helps to have one person that's going to kind of be point on gathering that information and making sure everything goes where it should. But the important thing to know is we make decisions as a group. So anything that we're doing, we'll talk about it together at our program meetings. We'll try to reach as much consensus as we can. If there are differences of perspective and direction, we'll kind of try to clarify those and honor the strengths and weaknesses of the different directions we could go. And then we vote, and if there's a majority in one direction or the other, we commit to that and we support each other in that commitment, and we kind of execute the direction of the program decision. So that's kind of short version of our process of governance and making decisions as a group. And as you also know, we've invited students to participate in that process. So really at any point, if students have an idea that they'd like the program to consider, that can be brought to the program meeting. Sally's the program assistant. Hungu is the current president. And so either of them, you can just tell them, and if the idea is ready for consideration, that can just be brought up at a meeting, and we'll discuss it. And when it's ready for a vote, we'll vote on it and we'll make a decision. That's basically, it's a pretty straightforward and transparent process how we make decisions. So my role in that is somewhat limited. I mainly control the agenda for the meeting. So people send me things ahead of time and I try to organize them so that we make good use of our time. But it's a collective process. So just, keep in mind, if there's something you're wanting to happen and you tell me, I have limited power to give you what you want other than it going through this process of decision making as a group. And we trust that. There's wisdom that comes from the different perspectives we have as a group. And so we prefer it that way. We don't want one person making decisions for everybody. So I wanted to give you just kind of vision type thinking. I do a lot of things in Excel. A lot of people think that's funny. You probably either think in Excel or you don't, and most people may not. But I laid out our whole program just in one document. I just wanted to kind of see, okay, what's the deal here? What has to be done? What's a checklist if you were, in 5 years going to go through the whole thing? And this was really helpful for me to kind of see. So, what you'll kind of see here is the vast majority of things I think are highly structured so that when you come into our program, they are going to kind of happen if you get started. If you start a course, we just almost never have people fail a course. If you get started on practicum, people tend to finish practicum. If you start your internship, people tend to finish their internship. So it's kind of just a process of getting started. Where I think seminar may be able to just help generate a conversation about the additional structures and supports that could help us, I think is in these top areas where there are major time commitments, but just because you get started, it's not guaranteed that you're going to finish. And so the burden is actually on you as a student, to kind of have the self-regulation to struggle through and figure out a way to get things done. And so this reminds me, of the emotional experience of getting that book in the mail. Here's 1,000 hours of workouts we want you to do this summer. Have fun. We'll see you in August at two-a-days. Yay. So I put prac on this list. That does kind of take care of itself, but there's a need for coordination with Dr. Turner of, what are your goals each year for hours, and making sure that you kind of are on pace to hit, we have everyone aim for like a minimum of 500 hours. And so, that's a piece that's a significant portion of time. That seems to happen. So comps is an area where I think we could use some additional conversation about what are our structures for supporting that process. And so we'll be talking more about that this year, but I'd like to activate the doctoral advisory committees more throughout people's training so that possibly once or twice a year, people have a chance to practice the kinds of things that will eventually show up on the comprehensive exam. And they can get formative feedback, low stakes feedback on how they're doing and areas to give more attention and focus before you sit for kind of a higher stakes exam. I definitely remember in my doctoral training, the comps was the thing I was most nervous about because my general sense was that people finished their dissertation, like their advisor was going to make sure that they were ready for that. And if their manuscript got through their advisor, they were going to be okay because advisors put a lot of work into kind of making sure that the projects were ready for a defense. And then the last area is just the research requirements. So everyone to finish is going to write 3 papers. The predis, which is, an empirical project, at least one data set, you're writing up the paper. Chapter 1, which is a systematic literature review, or it could be a conceptual paper, but it's not necessarily empirical. Some people have done meta-analyses, which technically is empirical. It's an empirical synthesis. And then chapter 2 is similar to the predis. It's just, finding a data set, collecting a data set, and writing up a paper. So it's 3 papers, on average 30 pages each, so about 90 pages that need to be written in about a 5-year period for you to get your degree. Again, this is like the book in the mail, so 90 pages, figure out a way to get it done. But I guess it's worth taking a step back and why are we doing all this work? Could we just not do that? Could we not do the 90 pages? Probably not. This is a scientist practitioner model, so part of your training is establishing that you are able to conduct primary research. And even if you don't intend on doing that in your future, it documents a level of competency to conduct and then, potentially evaluate research in the decision making that you're doing in whatever role that you're in the future. Trying to think, for everybody, no matter what their goal is, whether, like for me, I think within a year or so, I started to know that I wanted to go into academia and become a professor. I was really enjoying the work, and my mentor made it look really fun. He had just gotten off like a world tour where he went all around the world, like 26 countries, and then ended with like 3 months in Hawaii. So I was sold pretty quickly on that it looked fun, what he was doing, and there was a strong team dynamic. But not everybody has the same goals, and so an initial challenge for us in terms of kind of motivating some of these parts that don't just kind of happen once you get started is, why does this matter? Why should this get attention? And I think the least common denominator is something like we all want you to graduate on time, partially because there's opportunity cost. So as an example, if you took an extra year to start as an assistant professor, the average salary for 9 months is something like $75,000, and then you can make 33% summer pay. So that year extra that, if I was ABD for a year, that cost me $100,000. And so nobody wants that. That's a lot of money. This is just your life. I mean, you could invest that and let it sit in the bank for 40 years, and it would grow quite a bit. So the opportunity cost of not finishing these 3 projects in a timely manner is really high. But more than that, part of the reason why you're in a doctoral program is this is a structure designed to give you really high levels of expertise. It will qualify you for a number of elite opportunities as a psychologist. Anything from being a university professor, running your own business as a consultant, running university counseling centers, working as leadership staff in Veterans Administration hospitals. There's just really cool jobs that you would have access to if you invest the next 5 to 6 years of your life developing this kind of expertise. And the most condensed way I can kind of describe what it is you're trying to do, my mentor would say, never do anything for a single purpose. So any paper you write, anything you do, if you can align it with your goal of developing expertise in an area. For me, I wanted to study things like forgiveness and humility, so I connected that to every course I took. Anything that I was working on, I tried to help it move in the direction of building this expertise. If you're interested in doing clinical work with trauma, if you can align any work that you do with this general direction of developing expertise in that area, then over a 6-year period, you're accruing intensive experience with feedback on that experience in a way that is really high quality training. So one of my favorite books that kind of describes this process of compounded strategic investment. So use the analogy of if you put $100,000 in the bank now, 40 years from now, that would have grown quite a bit because of the way that compounding interest works. Well, there's a similar process that happens when you're developing expertise, where if you put consistent energy in the same direction and you are working hard and you give that, Malcolm Gladwell kind of popularized this idea, you give 10,000 hours and you're getting intensive feedback on this practice experience that you're going through over a 5 to 10 year period of your early career. What will start to happen is things get easier. There's an amplification that occurs. And I mean, just a simple way to illustrate this is, imagine that I read 50 articles on forgiveness in my first year. And so the first paper that I write, that took me a ton of time. But then let's say the next year I have a paper due in another class, and I've already read those 50 and I read 10 more. Now I've read 60 articles, but it really only took the additional effort of reading 10 more articles. But I have compounded my knowledge, and it was actually much easier for me to write a stronger paper because I had invested that time and energy in my first year. So that brings us a little bit to our first challenge. So we're a scientist practitioner model, and the training program that would work for one person, so I was wanting to go into academia, and I was basically trying to carve out as much time as I could to write papers and get feedback on my writing in the 4 short years that I had working with Dr. Worthington. And so I worked to really streamline the time that I was spending on practicum. So I would always put that on, about 2 days per week. And I would go and I would make sure all of my paperwork was finished. And on those 2 days, I was fully present to that work. But a big part of my planning was to structure my time in a way where I could get as much feedback as I could from Dr. Worthington while I had that time. Also worked to get my dissertation finished before I started internship, so that when I had 500 direct hours that year, my focus wouldn't be divided, and I would be able to really be present to the capstone clinical training experience. So this is actually good that we have people with different goals, but it's worth keeping in mind. It's almost as if we're training for different sports. If one person was training to do like a 100-yard sprint, and then another person was training to run the mile, there would be different training processes, and what works for one person wouldn't work for the other. That's similarly true. So for people who have already decided to commit to becoming a professor, that's going to imply one way of thinking about training during a doctoral program. Someone who's undecided, that's actually a different process. And so what would be needed to kind of keep the options open? Someone who's decided that they want to get a VA internship and work in the VA, that's a different process. So part of what we're needing to do in seminar is help people clarify what the different ways of structuring training are. And we can benefit from each other's expertise even if we decide not to develop that expertise. So an example is Ken Rice and M+. At this point in my career, I have not invested anywhere near the number of hours that Dr. Rice has in learning various types of M+ syntax. But I have the full benefit of all of his knowledge if I have that relationship established. So if I get stuck, I can ask Ken, hey, what's going on with this? And I have access to that expertise. And vice versa. So there are some things that I've done and given a lot more time and energy to that any of my colleagues, if they get to a point where they want to borrow on that expertise, they send me an email and I lend my knowledge and relationships to them. And so that's what's so powerful about us coming together as a training community, is that some of us may focus our primary energy and attention developing one set of skills, say it's statistics, longitudinal analyses, meta-analyses, various things research related. Other of us may focus on developing expertise in writing up assessment reports, and we may give significant best portions of our time and energy for several years to developing and refining those skills. So for me, the question is, how is it that we can use 1 day a month, a couple of hours, to create the interconnection that would allow us to share our strengths with each other? And I can give you an example of just a simple website that does something like this. So writingroutines.com has just a parallel structure for interviewing different authors, and it goes through and just asks them questions about how they keep track of their notes and what their habits are for when they write. And so when I was developing as a writer, I found this really useful just to hear different perspectives, and you would hear some common struggles, like at some level, if you don't sit down and, spend time writing, it's going to be hard to develop as a writer. So everyone was kind of figuring out different ways of regulating that behavior. But on the other hand, there was just really broad ranges of kind of habits that ended up developing that seemed contextualized to people's personalities and just what they enjoyed and what seemed to work for them. So I've aggregated various resources that I can kind of pass along to others who are trying to follow a similar kind of training trajectory of what I'm interested in. And what I would see us doing as a group is trying to do something similar. So where we're developing strengths and learning ways of doing things, how is it that we can make it easier to share those things with each other? So we have talented alumni. Like, wouldn't it be cool if part of what we did in this space is invite people with expertise within our broader network? What if we invited Terrence Jordan or Michael Massengill from the VA in Atlanta to come back and talk with us about, what's it been like since you graduated? Both of them are about 5 years out. So it takes about 10 years to really refine an area of expertise. That's about where they are. They've kind of have an initial pass on expertise development within this setting. I haven't done that. I would actually really love to hear what that process has been like and what they've learned. And that will complement and amplify my expertise in my area as I hear and learn from other people developing expertise in different areas. We could think the same way with university counseling centers, people who go into private practice, people end up developing consultation practices. So that's the big picture of what I think we should be about this year, what I'd like us to try. So what kind of work product would give us an excuse to kind of move in that direction? I mostly wanted to activate your doctoral advisory committee to give feedback. And most of you know this already because in the first year course, we've started to read the book Peak on Expertise Development. What I wanted to do is make sure that we had some things for you to work on that are just obviously relevant to your training. And then I want to make sure that you will end up having opportunities to get really high quality feedback on that work. And so if we can kind of put those things together, it seems like we'll have all of the ingredients for a helpful training structure. So a first part of what we would do is just anything that our guests invite us to do. A second thing is it seems like we're all in one way or another wanting to have resources to support the kind of work that we're doing. So by the end of the year, I think we should all try to submit at least one grant, fellowship, or scholarship. And we got a lot of feedback on the survey. It's a pretty common area of concern and interest of let's find ways to supplement funding. So we can kind of build that into our process this year and help each other to work towards that goal. It's a good idea to start getting connected to national organizations, and so everyone can submit at least one idea for a national conference. And if you don't want to actually travel to, for example, APA or APS, we have a mini conference that we run through the Matheny Center for the Study of Stress, Trauma, and Resilience, and so that would be a perfectly fine place to present some of your work, and that would generally align with supporting your research goals. I know Ev, my mentor, always talked about how he would use presentations as stimulus control, and so one way to make sure that you're making progress on a manuscript is to align some of your writing goals with conference presentations. So if I want to get a paper done by August, one way to kind of give myself some additional reinforcement is to submit a conference presentation for APA, and then I'll have to get that done at some level. And honestly, if you can write the paper and have a manuscript, it's easier to pull together a presentation. So that's a way of aligning your presentations with your writing work. The next thing that I want people to do is draft, kind of a less than one pager related to your research, teaching, and service. So for many jobs, you'll need something along these lines. This somewhat aligns with even what you'd be doing for your internship applications. And so I will talk more about this, and I can give you some samples and examples. But I think this is a way of articulating to yourself and other people where you are developmentally in terms of thinking about your professional goals and how they fit together. The next item is at the end of the year, I want us to practice the kinds of questions that would be on comps and give you a chance to get feedback from your doctoral advisory committee on how that's going. So obviously, if you've already taken comps, then you can skip that part. And then the last thing is I'd like to just make sure files are in order, so we'll double check everything in iCollege when we're doing annual evaluations for the year. So that's our list of activities. And I haven't met, so this Friday I'll talk with the counseling psych faculty. It's possible that we might tweak some of this, but the general idea would be, at least for the next 3 years, that you would have a portfolio of things that you would do. Anything that we agree as a program would be helpful to kind of synthesizing and creating connective tissue to support your training experience. And I'm wanting to activate the doctoral advisory committees and giving feedback on some of that work. So finally, let me go over what I think will be the schedule this year. There may be some tweaks to parts of this, but beginning of the year is typical lunch and welcome. We really just want to welcome the first years and reconnect with each other after the summer. Second day, I'd like us to focus on how can we help each other write a grant or fellowship for the year. So I imagine we'll dump various things that we know about into a Teams channel and just start to kind of aggregate that information. Different labs can kind of connect with either alumni or people who've been successful, and we'll try to generate kind of a shared list of possibilities. And I think we can talk together as a group, try to make decisions about a goal and a plan for the year. And we can also I'm happy to kind of share some ideas and tips on writing effective grants or fellowships or scholarship applications. But the short version is this is all about feedback. And honestly, the biggest part, if you have a structure to get high quality feedback on your work, the biggest issue is you are not going to get any grants that you don't apply for. So the primary behavior is persistence and just getting something into the mix. You have some sort of probability every time you submit a grant. It might be 3%, 3 or 4%. Sometimes it's as high as 50, 75%. And so, if let's just say the odds are 10%, you would need to submit 10 different things in order for something to get funded on average. So one of the things that we can do is help you think about, how competitive are some of the different things that you're applying for, and we can make sure that you have a plan. If that's an important goal, we'll try to come up with a plan that gives you a pretty good shot of getting something funded. On the 27th of October, Dr. Turner is going to come. We used to do this in the first year orientation to practicum course, but I'd like to have everyone there when we're talking with the first years about possible opportunities. And I think this is also a good chance for us to, just as an entire community, talk about how things are going with practicum and just kind of have a shared space to help everyone kind of think about their sequencing. That'll be really helpful for me to hear, because I feel like I've kind of gotten bits and pieces from hearing different cohorts at different times. But I would find it helpful at least once a year to kind of have that all come together into one conversation. On November 17th, we have outstanding expertise in the program faculty. And so I thought that a couple of times, so also in February, we would just have different faculty bring something that their team is really interested in or excited about. And it would basically be like the equivalent. Emerson every Friday has show and tell at his pre-K. And so I thought we could do something kind of similar where we might ask each other to do some preparation so that we've read some similar content, or we've watched the same thing, we're ready for a conversation. But let's invite each other into some of our areas of interest and expertise, so that we're starting to make some of those connections, and we can share expertise. We can have a sense of the kinds of things that different people in our program are doing. So that brings us to January 19th. What I'd like to do there is have a day where we talk about the process of applying for internship. That'll be helpful for the first years to hear, and we can kind of sample from people at different parts of that process. We'll have one group that's in the dead middle of interviewing for internships, so there's some narrative tension. It's like, where is everybody going to end up? And we'll hopefully be able to get a couple of people that are currently on internship. We can hear how that's going. So that'll just be kind of a panel. That we're not going to go for the entire length, because we want to be judicious with people's time, and that'll be a Zoom call. And honestly, we don't want to wear you out on Zoom. So that'll be a little shorter than our typical class. But I think that could be really helpful to spend a day on. I already mentioned February. So March 22nd, I would propose that day we do our cohort meetings. And so that's kind of captured time. If your cohort wants to find a different time to meet with me, we could work that out. I'm always on campus on Mondays and could potentially work out other days to meet with your cohort. So that could be flexible, but we have a process of every year setting goals for the priorities for the following year, and the cohort meetings kind of begins that process. So we kind of start with an in-person meeting, and then we generate different ideas. We put those in a survey. Different people can kind of rank the priority of the different things that we're considering. So that's what's happening on that day. And then finally, we'll have a comps day. So April 19th, Dr. Rice will come. It's possible we'll have other faculty, some of the question writers, and we can just have a shared meeting. People who have already taken comps can give some suggestions for preparation, and we'll consider some way of letting you take some practice questions and get feedback from your committee. So yeah, that's the plan for the year. We might make some tweaks. I haven't gotten feedback from the program on all of this. I kind of sent out the idea, and people generally seem supportive, but I want to kind of talk some of this through with the group and just see if there are any other tweaks we wanted to make. But this is the plan. So I'll just end. I feel like I'm kind of fully ensconced in kind of a mid-career stage, and one mantra, I was kind of looking up quotes by Emerson. I thought it would be cute if I had cool quotes that also were from the same name as my son. And one has really stuck with me. Friendship is the masterpiece of nature. I think everyone's kind of heard the idea that you need lots of practice. You need deliberate practice to develop expertise. So not just, spending time and being focused, but getting really quality feedback. But I think a missing piece is there's a motivational issue. For you to spend thousands and thousands of hours doing something, you really have to want to. There has to be a commitment, and really you need an intrinsic motivation that will help you even in times when you're tired and depleted and stressed, that there's a certain enjoyment of the work that you're doing, and there's a sense of value. And I think one of the things that can kind of bring our work up to the level where it's kind of motivationally over water, not underwater, is friendship. Some of the work that I think has been most productive and meaningful has happened within the context of really strong professional friendship. I'm thinking of like my friends Josh and Daryl. I'm thinking of work that I've done with Colleen or Ken, Mike McCullough, my training director at Clemson, Hal Stevens. He passed away of cancer a few years after I graduated, but I just deeply trusted him and was able to do some work in supervision that I really hadn't gotten to with anybody else, that made me a better clinician. So I think a type of professional trust, and I think friendship is probably the right word, is what we need to sustain the kind of work that we're doing. This is how you get from, what it was like for me in the basement, just having a book of what I was supposed to do, to, if I think about my experiences in team sports, some of my favorite memories are working in teams. And I've tried to replicate that joy in what it's like in my professional life. And I would invite you into a similar thing. There are certainly individual differences in how people like to do work, and not everybody's going to work in larger teams. But I really haven't run across anybody that can do creative work or that can develop their potential as a clinician without having some strong relationships that kind of help them grow and really get a sense of areas where they need to grow. So in that regard, I'm excited about the new center space. It's really cold down there. Hopefully we can figure out something with the air conditioning. But I think one of the ways that we can start to build relationships together is starting to spend time with each other and finding opportunities where we come back together. So I'm optimistic about the potential for that. I thought I would throw in kind of a caveat at the end related to service. There's a part of what I'm asking for that is a type of giving back. I'm asking for people, while you give significant amounts of your energy to developing your own skills, that you would leave aside some margin to share back with others. So when you write your service statement towards the end of the year, you'll have a chance to kind of take a shot at articulating this. You can get feedback from your mentor. But there is a little bit of a trick. If some of you were to spend like 80% of your best energy just doing service for the department, that would be exploitive. That wouldn't be helpful of your training. Us having you do, kind of administrative work or various kinds of things that are not advancing your primary training goals, something's gone wrong there. So at some point this year, I'll let y'all read some of the things that I wrote in my first year or two after having graduated from a doctoral program. I was kind of trying to synthesize what I learned and, kind of leave behind some suggestions for other people engaging a similar process. And, so for example, I learned that Ev used his teaching to help him refine some of his writing ideas. It was a feedback loop for him. If he could share an idea effectively with undergrads, that was almost a way of testing out the coherence and kind of people's interest and engagement for a popular audience. And so Ev tried to write to different audiences, and so teaching really complemented other parts of his creative work. But I'll kind of go over some of the things I wrote related to service. I was the kind of the equivalent of Sally. My GRA was I managed all the application stuff. So I didn't have a lot to do, and then there was about 2 months when we were doing admissions where I was really busy and had an important and trusted role in the program. But one of the things that had happened when I first came to VCU, that one year everyone in an entire group taking comps failed one of the questions. And people were really mad at one particular faculty member because they viewed this person as being responsible and unfair for kind of what happened. There was one student who, was delayed an entire year because he not only failed that question, but, had failed another question. So, that was a level of conflict that I have not seen in my 12, 13 years here at Georgia State. But it does stick with me. What I learned, I kind of came in a year after that, is I learned that there is a choice to make when there's stress in a system and, when there's conflict. You can get pulled into it, or there's an opportunity to positively influence your environment. And the decision that I made was to do what I could, what was within my influence, to try to build trust in the system, even though some people were not happy and some people were stressed and frustrated. Part of that was my own wish to be personally happy and to reduce and regulate my own stress. And part of that was just my commitment to the good of the group that I was a part of, and I wanted to contribute the strengths and gifts that I could. So it's a bit of a mixed message, but I would invite all of you, if you see problems, if you see things that need support or care or attention, don't wait for someone else to do it. I would ask you to help. That's how we're going to be a better and more supportive place, is if everyone involved, when they see a problem, if they, and if you care about it, do what you can to help. There is a balance that has to be struck. So for example, like if for me trying to get a job in academia, if I taught one course, that would be helpful. But every course I taught after teaching one, just showing that I could generally teach a course, was not going to help me get a job. And so there were diminishing marginal returns on that effort. So for this to be a place that's generally supportive, we really need a norm where everyone does their part. The trick of that is if we're all kind of hyper vigilant about boundaries and, is it fair? Who's pulling their weight? That's usually a sign that things have gone poorly. I remember Scott Stanley in his work on commitment in couples talked about that. Like once people are in a place of thinking that there's unfairness, it's usually a pretty bad sign and commitment has already deteriorated. What happens when there's high commitment within a relationship and in a system is there's generally a trust that, oh, you know what, things will even out in the end. I'm doing a little more here, but at some point when I need to, someone else is going to do more. And there's a trust of that. And so in order to have norms that are going to facilitate that kind of trust, I just think back to team sports, you pretty much need most people to have a viewpoint of, if something needs to be done, I'm going to do it. Like that's the normative behavior. And there's always going to be a little bit of free riding, but basically what happens in a strong and cohesive environment is at some point, if people are not contributing their fair share, it becomes very obvious, and trust is reduced for people who are less engaged and less, kind of positively contributing to the group. That's not a punitive process in any kind of way, but there's a general norm of, hey, this is what we do. If you're stepping into leadership, you're taking on a certain level of initiative and responsibility for, promoting a positive environment. So I can tell you, I've worked with the faculty in this program for a long time now, and I'm highly confident that those are the norms that we have as a group. And we're inviting doctoral students into a process of professional transition. And so I'm actually very confident that the kind of community that we have is one that promotes a certain kind of balance. We want to protect early career professionals. We want to make sure that in your doctoral training, you're not spending major amounts of time doing things that are not contributing to your long-term goals. At the same time, we do want to invite you into a process of being full citizens of a professional community and finding ways that you can offer some service that's in alignment with your areas of professional interest and expertise. That's definitely one of the tricks that I've had is like I'll end up, when I'm being evaluated for different promotions, you have to do some service, but I usually try to proactively find things that I already want to do and find highly valuable and also that align with building expertise. So for example, being an associate editor of a journal both builds my competence as a researcher and helps me with my writing, but it's also a really important service-related need. So that was kind of this last point is I ended up, almost applying the never do anything for a single purpose idea to thinking about service. And I've continued to build on this, both when I was promoted to associate and, as I'm kind of further, I was recently promoted to full. I think a big part that's happened for me in my first 10 or so years post-graduation is finding ways to have the different parts of what I do be more integrated with each other. I found ways for my teaching to really align with the kinds of work that I'm trying to do in my lab. More recently, I've tried to look for ways that any kind of administrative roles are building similar kinds of skills that I'm trying to also learn in doing grant work and building teams. And so I think we want something similar for you where what we would be doing in seminar is learning how to take these very different things that you're doing, different courses, practicum, research, any kind of GRA work you're doing, and make sure that it's not just a bunch of things on a really long to-do list, but there starts to be a synthesis and an integration. That does leave me kind of with a final point, which is, you're each running your own race, and so don't get too caught up focusing on what anybody else is doing. My best example of this is when I was going to undergrad, I had a roommate, his name was Stacy, and he played hockey. And Stacy did not need to sleep as much as I did. So he would get home somewhere around like midnight and do his homework till like 2 a.m. And then he would wake up at like 6 a.m. I still don't know what Stacy was doing. But he just had tremendous amounts of energy. And didn't need to sleep. And so for a little while, I thought, oh, that's awesome. Maybe I'll try to do that. And I'm like absolutely the opposite. If I'm not getting pretty close to 7 or 8 hours of sleep, my mental functioning goes way down. My emotion regulation is worse. I feel more stressed. And so it took me longer than it should have to realize that I shouldn't try to be like Stacy. I mean, Stacy was awesome and it was working for him. But when I was trying to kind of follow his training habits, that would have burned me out. I mean, I was not doing very well. I was miserable. So that's a worthwhile caveat to say. So we're coming together, and there's a positive pressure that can happen when we come together and share our strengths with each other, and we learn from each other. When I went through my doc program, Josh was a year ahead of me, and so everything he did, I could learn from. Like, he made decisions in his dissertation that were really frustrating for him, and then I was able to, use social learning and just avoid major hassles and struggles because I just was like, that didn't work very well. I'll do something different. So that would be a positive use of social learning. And we also need to remember to somehow avoid a negative use of comparison or envy, those kind of things. How do we kind of keep that to a minimum? Because you really are past some of the significant selection processes in your life. You're in a PhD program. We're now supporting you, and you are going to develop expertise. It's unclear what area that will be, possibly, but it is going to happen as you invest time and energy and you get feedback on your work. That process, in certain ways, is downhill. So yeah, I think that's it. In terms of trying to describe a big picture of what we're hoping to do this year, I'd appreciate any feedback and looking forward to talking with everybody about some of these goals.